Discover the incredible moment I overcame my son's fiancé's mockery, revealing hidden strengths. Susan sat at her cluttered desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and office plants that were barely alive. The fluorescent lights buzzed lethargically above her, its glow reflecting the weight she carried in her chest. As the clock ticked loudly, she thought of Melissa, Jason's fiancée, with her bright smile and sharp tongue that seemed to cut through the air with precision. Every family gathering had become a battlefield, where Melissa's pointed comments felt like arrows aimed straight at Susan's heart. A master of organization, and yet you Haven T managed to turn your life into a masterpiece, Melissa had taunted at the last dinner, laughter bubbling over as the family looked on. That laughter echoed in Susan's mind like a sinister chorus, leaving her questioning her choices. The sacrifice she made for her son, the relentless work she put into climbing the ranks of her office, all felt like futile efforts when compared to the flawless path Melissa walked. Fear whispered insidiously that she was destined to remain invisible, the shadow of a woman who had once dreamed brightly. The glimmer of hope she hid deep within began to fade, swallowed by doubt and the relentless pursuit of security in a world that often overlooked the hardworking and unnoticed. As her thoughts spiraled, the hum of an impending deadline weighed on her. The air felt thicker, and a wave of anxiety crashed over her when she remembered cleaning out the attic last summer. In that dusty space, she had stumbled upon an old sketchbook, a yellowed artifact from her younger days when bold colors danced on canvases that reflected her soul. Painful nostalgia flooded her, stirring a longing she hadn't felt in years. Could she still paint? Could she find that part of herself again amidst the turmoil? Her heart raced, but the cacophony of Melissa's mockery clawed at her resolve. Perhaps a middle-aged office manager had long since missed her chance to create. The weekly community potluck, the starting bell for an art competition, rang in her ears. The buzz around her intensified. A vein of excitement thrummed within her, but it was quickly followed by a cloud of dread. Art had always been her escape, a private haven, but now it felt like stepping into the lion's den. Could she compete against young talents bursting with promise? Doubt danced like shadows across her mind. Who was she to think she could reclaim an identity long subdued? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The tension in her chest tightened as she recounted family gatherings where the knife-edged comments from Melissa felt relentless. The smirks and dismissive glances from family members drove a wedge deeper into her heart, leaving her feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. Just as the promise of her past flickered dangerously low, desperation fueled Susan's courage. Armed with paintbrushes in the dim corners of late nights, she became consumed by each stroke, letting colors swallow her worries while doubts tightened their grip around her. The deadline approached with equally menacing speed, and the night of the family celebration crept in, a torrent of conflicting feelings thrumming beneath her skin. Holding her art submission close, she glanced at the crowd, spotting Melissa's leveled gaze and dismissive smirk. A tremor ran through her as she teetered at the edge of revelation. Would she muster the strength to unveil her spirit amidst voices that sought to silence her? Would she allow Melissa's laughter to dim her light once and for all? The waves of fear crashed harder, and Susan stood on the precipice, her heart gripped by uncertainty, waiting for the moment she would claim her voice. Susan felt the weight of the art submission in her hand, its canvas surface still fresh, a tangible piece of her reclaiming a lost part of herself. The bright colors were a stark contrast to the muted tones of her existence, and as she stood there, trembling with anticipation, she realized the moment had come. The crowd around her faded as she honed in on Melissa's sneer, her arch-enemy whose laughter was like a clamorous bell tolling for her defeat. A pulse of determination rushed through her veins. This wasn't just about the competition anymore. It was about silencing the narratives that had clung to her like shadows, the ones calling her a failure, the ones that painted her invalid. She took a deep breath, allowing the words of encouragement she whispered to herself to fortify her resolve. Stepping away from the crowd, she found a quiet corner against the wall that held moments of warmth in the mingling echoes of laughter. As she held her submission closer, she closed her eyes and let the vibrant colors flood her mind. Each hue represented every sacrifice she had made, every sleepless night working through spreadsheets and negotiations, and every brush stroke from her attic relics that spoke of unbridled joy and creativity. In that instant, she realized she was no longer just a mother or an office manager. She was an artist, a force driven by the desire to create and be seen. The clatter of dishes and fragments of conversation were punctuated by Melissa's voice, taunting her from afar. "What an ambitious idea, Susan. Too bad we can't all be as talented as the youth." The sneer dripped from Melissa's lips like poison, but instead of sinking into despair, Susan felt a fire ignite. Instead of being the recipient of ridicule, she would be the architect of her narrative. "It's time to show them," she thought fiercely, her hands gripping her submission tighter. With deliberate steps, she walked toward the main area. Her heart thundered in her chest as she felt the weight of all eyes turned to her. The familiar tension crept in again, but this time she embraced it. This was not merely a stage, it was a realm where her vulnerabilities mingled with strengths. As she approached the display table, she saw other submissions laid out, full of youthful exuberance and dazzling techniques. For a fleeting moment, doubt tried to seep back in, whispering taunts that she was out of place. But she recalled countless nights spent surrounded by paints and canvases, each session a piece of herself shaped through color and creativity. In that realization, she stood taller, ready to cast aside her insecurities. With a deep breath, she set her piece down amongst the others, a burst of color that sang of forgotten dreams and newfound courage. As she stepped back to admire her work, chills ran down her spine. This wasn't merely a painting, it was a declaration of her journey and evolution. She scanned the faces around her, seeing families and friends, but more importantly, she locked eyes with Melissa. The fiancée's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing her features as she surveyed the submission. It was a small victory, but it filled Susan with a rush of empowerment. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could redefine her place here. Yet, as the judges began analyzing the pieces, Susan felt a new wave of uncertainty rise within her. She hadn't just risked a painting, she had put forth a part of her soul. Would it be enough? Would the judges see what she poured into each brushstroke, or would they overlook her? Questions circled around her, but one thing was clear: whatever the outcome, she had transformed that moment into something greater than anyone else had anticipated. A voice called for the submissions to be reviewed, and she steadied herself, ready to embrace whatever fate awaited her. In that frenzied heartbeat, she grinned, understanding that she had already triumphed over the doubts that had once consumed her. A resolve swelled within, but as the first names echoed through the room, a sudden silence fell. Melissa's voice pierced through the chatter with surprise, and all eyes turned toward her, waiting for what would unfold next. The room buzzed with anticipation. Would Susan's story take a turn she never expected? The first name echoed through the room, a wave of murmurs rippling through the crowd. Susan's heart raced. Each note of uncertainty reverberated, heightening the tension woven within the fabric of the moment. She clenched her fists, her focus sharpening as she braced herself for the reactions, knowing all too well what Melissa's skepticism could foster in her heart. Then, amidst the names, her breath hitched when Melissa's submission was announced. Applause erupted, and Susan's stomach twisted. Did they see the glitz over substance? The moment was marked with bitterness, but in that depth of despair, something deeper stirred within her, the will to confront the narrative swirling around her. As applause from Melissa's fans faded into the near distance, Susan realized Melissa's triumph was a choice, not a measure of her own worth. The questions she had battled internally suddenly transformed into the realization that the journey ahead was as much about her character as it was about artistry. The echo of laughter mixed with clapping faded as she processed the dichotomy. The judges continued their evaluations, navigating through discussions, while Susan stood rooted in uncertainty. She could feel their scrutiny like a tangible weight. Would they dismiss her effort as the naive endeavor of a turbulent newcomer? Her thoughts spiraled. Flashes of past criticisms haunted her. They threatened to breach the walls she'd finally begun to construct, reminding her of all the times she had let self-doubt steer the course of her life. Yet, the corners of her mouth curved upward slowly as she began to recenter herself. wasn't this exactly the path she'd chosen? To engage with unfiltered vulnerability, to expose herself to all forms of judgment? In that instant, it became clear, each brush stroke on the canvas echoed her resilience. With every blend of color, she had stood her ground against trivialities, against those who sought to belittle her evolution. The name of the next submission was called, another small victory for someone else. Susan felt the swell of camaraderie, even among her competitors. Some had grappled with their own battles. She was part of a larger tapestry of ambition and aspiration. Suddenly, the entire room transformed in her mind from a den of potential critics to a chorus of individuals all looking to find their voice. Melissa leaned into her circle of admirers, her laughter bubbling up, but it was different now. Instead of bitterness, Susan sensed sympathy beneath the layers of pretense. Was she frightened of being challenged by someone like Susan? In that reflection, a hint of pity flitted across her awareness. Perhaps Melissa was less an adversary and more a mirror to something Susan needed to confront within herself. Suddenly, Susan knew what she needed to do. Rather than awaiting validation, she resolved to engage directly with Melissa. Instead of hiding behind her insecurities, she embraced the exhilaration of empowerment, a silent declaration that she would no longer exist under the weight of mockery. The shadow of another's bitterness would not define her reality. As the judges moved closer to announcing the final outcome, the anticipation in the room thickened. Susan faced Melissa directly, her expression calm and resolute, ready to challenge whatever narrative lingered in the air. The moment had come for her to step into her power, to confront the reality that every judgment she faced was a reflection of her determination to rise above. As the final name drew near, pounding echoes of her heartbeat filled her ears. Would she be named amongst them? In that moment, a voice inside her whispered, "It doesn't matter if they see it now, what matters is that you do." And just then, the outcome was announced. Susan's breath caught. Despite the uncertainty, she prepared to confront whatever followed. She would not be crumbling under weight again. She would forge her own path forward, whatever that might entail. The announcement crashed over Susan like a cold wave. The name rolled off the judge's tongue, and in that split second, she was submerged in a cascade of emotions. It wasn't her name. Relief intertwined with the sharp sting of disappointment, blanketing her senses as the audience erupted into applause again. Yet even as applause filled the air, Susan's mind jolted back to the realization she had just grasped moments prior. This was just one moment in a much larger journey. The absence of a title wouldn't dictate her worth. With that thought, embers of determination began to glow within her spirit, igniting a fierce resolve. Turning away from the crowd, she focused on the canvas she had submitted. It might not have been celebrated today, but it was the culmination of her effort, her growth, and her newly found courage. The canvas, like herself, embodied a story of struggle and triumph, a symphony of colors that spoke of vulnerabilities explored. Next time, she whispered to herself, a vow under her breath that resonated with clarity. The initial sting of defeat transformed into a resounding promise of improvement. Susan imagined the pale sky overhead, a blank canvas itself, eager to be painted anew with opportunity. She could feel the subtle vibrations of conversations around her. Competitors who had once seemed distant were now familiar. They had all forged trails unique to them, each grappling with their own perceptions and judgments. Even Melissa had her own struggles. She wasn't untouchable. In that realization, Susan's competitive fire flickered brightly. This experience had underscored something vital. Her journey was hers to command. Drifting through the crowd, she encountered one of her peers, Jamie, who put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Your piece was powerful, Susan." It resonated with so many. His sincerity washed over her like balm on a tender wound. They exchanged thoughts about her work and shared insights about the creative process, opening pathways for collaboration she had never considered before. In that moment, Susan recognized that connection could weave strength into her journey. Perhaps her path lay not solely in striving for recognition but in nurturing genuine relationships with artists who were just as passionate. The intensity between competition and kinship softened as she internalized that this field wasn't solely about individual accolades. The more Susan engaged with others, the more she began to discover her leadership potential. Questions fired through her mind. How had she become a beacon for others in their own creative uncertainties? Could she help guide the less confident towards their breakthroughs? The prospect of mentoring intrigued her, shifting her focus onto uplifting those around her. As the applause began to fade, the scattered thoughts crystallized in her mind. This could be the turning point she had sought. Somehow, the brush she felt wielding against her canvas now had the power to paint the stories of others. She could stand at the helm, steering her journey and lifting others, transforming what could be despair into hope. Yet as the evening came to a close, an unexpected twist emerged. Melissa approached her, an unreadable expression carved on her face. The moment felt significant, like crossing a threshold that would redefine their dynamic. Susan's heart raced as she readied herself, anticipating what this confrontation might hold. The time had come to face more than just a rival, it was an opportunity to redefine their relationship entirely. Would this change be one of redemption or conflict? The tension in the air thickened, leaving Susan on the precipice of revelation. Melissa's presence commanded attention as she approached Susan, her confidence stride a stark contrast to the uncertainty that flared within Susan's chest. For a moment, time slowed, and the noise of the audience faded into a distant hum. It was just them, the echoes of their rivalry, the frayed edges of their occasional camaraderie laying bare before them. "Hey, Susan," Melissa began, her tone unexpectedly soft. "I wanted to talk to you about your piece." The words hung in the air, laced with implications that both startled and intrigued Susan. Beneath the surface, she felt a tempest of emotions, the lingering sting of comparison, the trepidation of vulnerability, and a daring spark of curiosity. What could Melissa have to say? Was it a compliment, or would it be casual dismissal dressed up as concern? I saw how it moved people," Melissa continued, seeming to gauge Susan's reaction. "It was different, you know. Raw. I think a lot of us are trying to achieve that level of authenticity. It really got me thinking about my own work." Susan blinked, taken aback by the sincerity. It wasn't the jab she expected. Instead, it felt like an opening, a crack through which understanding might seep. Yet, skepticism tugged at her thoughts. Was Melissa really reaching out? Or was this a strategic play to maintain her own dominance? "Are you saying you want to collaborate?" Susan asked cautiously, her voice steady despite the disarray of thoughts racing through her mind. Melissa smiled, though it felt warmer than Susan had anticipated. "Actually, yes. I think we could create something powerful together." In that instant, Susan grappled with the implications of the offer. It was an invitation into an uncharted territory of unity in a world she had seen too narrowly as belonging to only one winner. Could embracing this connection allow her to further develop her abilities and foster her newfound passion for mentorship? Or would it dilute her voice, a concern that quickened her pulse, summoning her resolve? Susan responded, "I would like that. But I need to be honest, I want it to be a genuine collaboration, not a competition. We both have something unique to bring." Melissa nodded, the agreement lighting a spark of relief in Susan. There it was, the intersection of collaboration and competition, a balance she wished to explore more. The walls that had once segmented them began to dissolve. This was a unique opportunity for growth and alliance that could surpass their previous rivalry and evolve into mutual encouragement. As they spoke, Susan felt visions of future projects swirl in her mind. They would delve into each other's creative processes, uncover hidden strengths, and forge a new path in their artistic journeys. She envisioned a series of pieces that reflected their different perspectives, each stroke of color echoing the challenges they both faced. But just as they started to map out their collaboration, a shadow of doubt crept into Susan's thoughts. Was she truly ready to step away from the singular pursuit of recognition? What if Melissa's intentions turned selfish? The tension began to filter back in, as if the universe were prodding her to confront the nature of her willingness to change. The success of their partnership hinged on mutual trust, an area where she had previously faltered. As the night wore on, Susan knew that this was about more than art. It was about redefining her identity as both an artist and an individual. It was an awakening, a challenge to not just rise against barriers but actively dismantle them, stepping forward hand in hand where once there had been only friction. The possibilities swirled around her, and yet one glaring thought lingered in the shadows. Could she manage to lead a collaborative process while still nurturing her own voice? The moment of clarity would come, but it would require introspection, a quest for fortitude that would not be easily attained. What lay ahead awaited discovery, both within herself and in her relationship with Melissa. As they parted, the air electric with promise, Susan found a path calling to her. She could emerge not just as a competitor but a leader. But at what cost would she forge ahead? Would her hidden strengths be enough for the journey she was about to embark on? In the days following her conversation with Melissa, Susan felt like she was navigating a new terrain, each day bringing with it the exhilarating thrill of possibility and the oppressive weight of uncertainty. The prospect of collaboration loomed large, casting a shadow over her routine, stirring feelings of both excitement and anxiety. Her studio had become a refuge for introspection, each canvas a silent witness to her thoughts. As she prepared for her first brainstorming session with Melissa, she found herself reflecting on what it meant to truly collaborate. Would it require compromising her artistic integrity? The thought sent a ripple of concern through her. For years, she had poured every ounce of her being into maintaining her unique voice. Could she risk it now? She filled her paintbrush with a vibrant hue, letting the bristles dance across the canvas while struggling to find the answer. Color flowed, but her thoughts remained tethered. She had always been someone who thrived in solitude, finding solace within her own creative process. The notion of sharing that space felt as daunting as stepping into unfamiliar waters. As the hour approached, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The frazzled reflection was a stark reminder that self-doubt had become a familiar companion on this journey. But there was also something new, a glimmer of determination lurking beneath the uncertainty, whispering encouragement that perhaps vulnerability could lead to growth. When Melissa arrived, they greeted each other with tentative smiles, an unspoken tension hanging between them. The room buzzed with energy, two artists ready to explore new dimensions. But as they began exchanging ideas, Susan felt a wave of insecurity wash over her. Melissa's confidence was evident, her ideas flowing freely like water from a spring, while Susan struggled to articulate her vision as fear clouded her mind. "What do you think?" Melissa asked, an expectant smile lighting her face after sharing her initial thoughts. The question lingered like an echo, and Susan's heart raced. Should she speak up and risk showing weakness, or hold back to maintain her composure? "I think it's great," she replied hesitantly, but then added, "though I feel like it's missing something. Maybe a deeper exploration into our personal backgrounds?" The words caught her by surprise. They tumbled out before she could question them. Was she truly willing to expose her own story, her vulnerableness? Melissa's eyes widened slightly, but then she nodded thoughtfully, clearly intrigued. "I love that," Melissa exclaimed. "Our backgrounds shape our work, and facing them could add layers to what we create." As they dove headfirst into discussions merging their individual histories, pain, joy, and triumph, Susan felt an unexpected warmth. Sharing led to an understanding that bridged the gap between them. The collaborative process no longer felt like a battlefield, it transformed into a sanctuary where ideas intertwined. For the first time, Susan foresaw the beauty of melding different perspectives, yet even within this burgeoning partnership, the voice of doubt whispered reminders of the very real risks involved. Could she truly shed her fears? Every commitment she considered seemed painted with shades of hesitation. The stakes felt higher than ever. Days turned into nights as they continued to brainstorm and refine their artistic endeavor. Susan found her perspective shifting, witnessing the strength that came from vulnerability. She began to discover hidden competencies within herself, how her experiences could fuel creativity rather than hinder it. But just as she embraced this transformation, fear lashed out like a predator. What if the exposure ruined her career? The shadows of competition crept closer, threatening to suffocate the progress she had made. The moment loomed as she prepared for their first combined work, an exhibition that showcased not just their pieces but the delicate dynamic they had begun to cultivate. Would her confidence hold, or would the fear of failure entangle her? Once more, all she had to do was show up, but the stakes had never felt higher. Could she push past the fear and into the light of opportunity? Would the collaboration ultimately redefine not only her artistic journey but her very identity? As she stared at the unfinished canvas glowing under the studio lights, the question that resonated was not merely about art but about the person she was becoming. The journey had just begun, but she sensed a storm brewing on the horizon, one that would test her resolve like never before. Would she rise to the occasion, or would she be swept away into the chaos of doubt? Susan stood in her studio, the unfinished canvas still vibrant yet haunting. Each stroke stared back at her, demanding attention, begging to be freed from the confines of doubt. Just days before, her partnership with Melissa felt like a nascent flower, fragile and tentative. Now, every unresolved line echoed with the promise of potential, a challenge that weighed heavily on her shoulders. As the date of their exhibition approached, the thrill of creation mingled uneasily with a gnawing anxiety that plagued her, tugging at the edges of her confidence. Susan had always taken pride in her individuality as an artist, and yet, in this collaboration, she found herself wrestling with the fear of losing part of herself. Would becoming a duo dilute the authenticity she had fought so fiercely to cultivate? Melissa's presence brought a new energy and artistic self that lit up when they bounced ideas off each other. Yet, the further their project progressed, the more Susan grappled with her insecurities. The sharing had unlocked a door to a realm she had kept sealed for so long, but she remained terrified of the view beyond that threshold, scared of what others would think and, most of all, what they would say about her work. The night before their exhibition, sleepless hours stretched into a labyrinth of self-doubt. The shadows cradled her in an unsettling embrace, whispering insidious thoughts that tugged at her composure. She thought of Melissa, how seamlessly she commanded the room, how her confidence seemed to rise from a wellspring of assurance. Would she, too, find that sense of certainty blooming in her heart? Or was she destined to be a mere footnote in someone else's narrative? Tensions rose within as she tossed and turned, her mind replaying every moment of their collaboration in vivid detail. There were conversations where ideas flowed freely, moments painted with shared laughter. Yet, in the quiet solitude of the night, all those flashes of joy felt overshadowed by looming criticism. What if the exhibition highlighted her inadequacies, left her exposed, vulnerable to scorn? Turning her gaze to the array of colors laid out on the table, she struggled to find stillness. As if summoned by some unseen force, her hand moved instinctively, picking up a brush. In that act, a wave of clarity washed over her, breaking through the fog of despair. It wasn't just about the end result, it was the journey, the audacity to embrace the entire spectrum of experience, both the brilliant and the bleak. She began to paint, allowing layers of emotion to guide her strokes. In that moment, the act ceased to be about the exhibition itself, transforming into an act of self-affirmation. Each color became a declaration of her existence, an exploration of who she was both as an artist and a person. Susan let go of the notion of perfection, and infused the canvas with her story, her struggles, and her voice, the very essence she feared might be lost. Hours slipped by as she poured herself onto that canvas, her heart sinking with every movement she made. The fear that had held her hostage gradually dissolved, replaced by an urge so compelling that it reignited her passion. As the dawn broke through her studio windows, the shadows retreated, revealing a completed piece of fusion of herself and the partnership she had built. The moment was transformative, marking a pivotal shift. Susan finally recognized that her vulnerabilities could coexist with her strength, serving as a wellspring for creativity rather than the chains that bound her. It wasn't about stepping outside her comfort zone, it was about embracing every corner of her self-expression, regardless of the shadows it might bring. But as the day of the exhibition dawned, a fresh wave of nerves threatened her newfound resolve. This was the moment when exposure met expectation, where creativity stood at the edge of judgment. As Susan dressed in the vibrant colors mirroring her latest creation, the question loomed: was she ready to confront the world outside her studio, or would those old fears close in on her again? With a deep breath, she took the final glance at her canvas, whispering a silent vow to trust in herself and the partnership she had nurtured with Melissa. The stage was set, and the time had come to reveal her truth. Would she walk into that space filled with uncertainty, or would she finally seize the opportunity to stand unapologetically in her authenticity? The door had just opened, unveiling the world outside, and as she stepped toward it, one realization crystallized: this journey was only just beginning. The moment Susan stepped into the gallery, despite the vibrant decor and the encouraging chatter of esteemed guests, she felt dissonance shimmer like static in the air. The weight of unresolved expectations pressed against her chest. Every eye in the room seemed to bear the potential to judge, dissect, and minimize her work, alongside her identity as an artist. Among the crowd, she spotted Melissa, her collaborator, effortlessly weaving through the throngs, a beacon of confidence that shone brightly that if only she could absorb a fraction of that assuredness. Susan felt herself becoming a shadow, lurking at the edge of her own life, questioning not only her art but the very essence of who she was. Was this what collaboration entailed, being overshadowed by another's brilliance? The questions surged, ceaseless and churning. As the guests began filtering into the exhibition hall, Susan was struck by a sudden realization. She had painted not just for the exhibition, but for herself. The night before, she had summoned every ounce of vulnerability and transformed it into a visual language. And now, standing before her work, she felt torn between pride and trepidation. Could she allow others to see her true self? A gentle tug on her arm snapped her from her thoughts. It was Melissa, her expression alight with excitement. "Susan! Look at this. They're raving about our piece." Her enthusiasm was infectious, a spark that ignited something dormant within Susan. Perhaps this wasn't just about her, but about what they could build together, a collaboration that might elevate both their voices. Melissa's enthusiasm resonated, yet Susan found herself withdrawing again as they approached a group of attendees bubbling with energy. Susan could feel their judgment like a foreign tongue wrapping around her throat. When a patron pointed at their artwork, proclaiming it a new bold move in the contemporary art scene, Susan internalized the phrase, wanting to rejoice. But could it truly be about both of them, or was it Melissa they truly saw? As the night continued, she witnessed moments that carved new paths through her psyche. One guest drew parallels between their work and renowned artists, igniting conversations, while another gazed deep into the colors she poured, her story woven into each layer. Every reaction was a thread pulling her closer to understanding the significance of her own creation, but doubt still tainted the undertones. Then came an unexpected confrontation. An acquaintance of Melissa, someone Susan recognized from social circles, regardful yet expressive, commented snidely, "It's nice to see what happens when you paint with a real artist." The room felt too small, too loud. In that moment, Susan became acutely aware of her past naivety. The faint fear that had lingered, the shadows she had fought against, now asserted themselves through the crackle of tension. With a calmness that surprised even herself, Susan leaned into the discomfort. "I'm proud to have collaborated with Melissa," she responded, her voice even, a contrast to the tempest in her chest. "However, this piece remains mine as well. Every stroke, every thought, is a testament to my growth." The exchange and the perceived judgment forced her to confront an unsettling reality. She could own not only her artwork but also the journey that brought her here. It was a realization that fed her resolve. She had artistic agency, a voice that deserved to resonate alongside Melissa's. With newfound determination, Susan moved through the gallery, embracing conversations, asking questions, engaging in dialogues she had previously shied away from. As she shared the inspirations behind her work and the transformative journey she had undertaken, a warmth radiated from within. What had once felt like shackles began to feel like wings, lifting her toward uncharted realms of creativity and self-acceptance. Yet, as the night wound down and accolades poured in, Susan couldn't shake the lingering thought. The comparison game continued. While she had found strength in her identity during this exhibition, would she manage to sustain it in future collaborations? Would she be able to continuously redefine what it meant to be her own artist? As the last of the guests left, the applause fading into the echoes of uncertainty, Susan stood beside the canvas that had become so much more than paint and color. Suddenly, the weight of expectation morphed into an exhilarating challenge to nurture authenticity in herself and her newfound partnership. In that moment, she understood, the journey was far from over. How would she protect her unique identity as she embraced and grew with others' influence? The question flickered like a flame, promising to illuminate deeper paths ahead. With one last glance at Melissa, who was savoring the last of the evening's triumph, Susan felt the swell of possibilities unfolding, waiting to be met. As the gallery emptied and the echoes of laughter and applause faded, Susan felt the lingering buzz of adrenaline coursing through her. She had embarked on a journey that night, stepping into the light and away from the shadows. Yet, uneasily, she recognized that the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The connection she had formed with her art didn't erase the haunting echoes of doubt that threatened to resurface. With Melissa still occupied with the last few patrons making their farewells, Susan made her way to a quiet corner of the gallery, her heart racing. She felt a dissonance within her. Celebrations of newfound recognition clashed with persistent questions. Could she decisively carve out her identity, or would she always teeter between admiration and resentment? Her thoughts drifted back to the comment that had stung her like a cold wind. The acquaintance's mockery clung to her, not as a burden but as a catalyst. What if she transformed that bitterness into resolve? Instead of succumbing to self-doubt, could she confront the inherent insecurities that shadowed her work? Gripping the edge of one of the gallery's sleek display tables, she considered her next steps. Perhaps this was less about competing with Melissa and more about understanding her own definition of success as an artist. What did success mean to her individually, separate from the noise of others' opinions? The answers felt elusive but necessary. As she gazed at her artwork, she recognized that each brushstroke told her story. The vibrant colors conveyed emotion that only she could articulate through her art. What if she organized her thoughts into a new project, one that was entirely hers, yet still connected to her collaboration with Melissa? She could create a series that embodied her relationship with personal challenges much like her experience that night. Before making any concrete decisions, however, Susan knew she needed to embark on a journey of self-exploration. It was no longer about merely sharing a canvas, it was about sharing her narrative and honoring her path toward authenticity. To achieve this, she needed to confront her limitations head-on. Could she confront her memories? Find solace in shared struggles? She believed exploring these themes through her work might allow her to more clearly articulate her voice, distinguishing it from others. As the exhaustion of the past hours began pulling at her limbs, she felt a sense of clarity forming within. She would create a new body of work, one that spoke not only of her milestones but also the stepping stones of insecurity. Entirely reliant on her reflection, it would be a testament to the woman she was becoming, a woman who was no longer constrained by others' perceptions. In the days that followed, Susan dedicated herself to this new project, finding solace in solitude as she dove into her artistic process. Whatever emerged from this exploration was bound to be a revelation for her and those who encountered it. However, as she began to paint again, Susan felt her fears gnawing at her. Would this endeavor withstand judgment? Would she be brave enough to fully express herself? The question loomed over her: could she really redefine the stage of her artistry, overcoming the insecurities that had once held sway over her? When she was finally ready to share her work again, she would confront a new set of challenges, a gallery exhibition that explored her journey but carried the risk of vulnerability laid bare. It would be an exercise in bravery, exposing her innermost thoughts and feelings, vulnerable yet strong. As the initial strokes took shape on the canvas, Susan realized it wouldn't just be a test of artistic skill or judgment. This would be the showdown between her former self and who she was now becoming. Determined, she visualized standing before an audience, the applause ringing with authenticity. What would it feel like to own her truth completely? That question ignited a fire within her, pushing her to confront the upcoming challenges head-on. With a deep breath, Susan reframed her narrative. But just as she surrendered to the creative flow, her phone buzzed with a notification, a message from Melissa. "We need to talk about our next project. I have a feeling it'll be huge." The enthusiasm in Melissa's words pulled Susan into a moment of uncertainty. Would she be ready to blend her vision with her collaborators? Would she remain true to herself amidst that exciting chaos? The conflict brewed within her as she considered the implications of their collaboration and the territory it could redefine. How could she merge her new perspective without losing her burgeoning sense of identity? Susan knew she was standing on the precipice of an important decision, one that would shape not only her art but her confidence for the road ahead. Would she embrace this partnership fully, or would she draw a line to safeguard her own authenticity? The choice lay heavily before her, and Susan had to confront it soon. In the weeks that followed, Susan found herself in a whirlwind of creative energy and emotional clarity. Each brushstroke on her canvas conveyed not just artistic expression but a narrative of her experiences, struggles, and victories. The new body of work she was creating was laden with layers of vulnerability, yet infused with an undeniable sense of strength. As Susan prepared for her exhibition, she felt a solid confidence building within her. The palette she chose captured the complexities of her journey, deep blues symbolizing her past insecurities, vibrant oranges and yellows showcasing her newfound courage, and soft greens representing personal growth. This time, she was not merely presenting art, but sharing a piece of her soul with the world. The night of the exhibition felt different. Instead of the usual tension that would twist her stomach into knots, she was fueled by anticipation. This was her moment, a culmination of weeks spent navigating the delicate balance between collaboration and individual identity. As she entered the gallery, rather than feeling overshadowed, she felt empowered, shoulders back and head held high, ready to greet friends, colleagues, and critics alike. Melissa was already there, beaming with pride as guests admired their joint work. Susan approached her, and instead of the expected competitive undercurrents, they exchanged glances filled with mutual respect and understanding. "You've really come into your own, Susan," Melissa acknowledged, her voice warm and genuine. The crowded gallery fostered conversations that illuminated both their pieces. For the first time, Susan felt like a legitimate artist, valued not solely for her collaboration with Melissa, but for the resonance and authenticity of her own voice. Guests were drawn to her standalone work, their comments laden with admiration. "Your vulnerability shines through these pieces," a patron said, and Susan's heart swelled. She had done it. The turning point came when an experienced art critic approached her, eyes glittering with intrigue. He analyzed her piece, speaking thoughtfully about the raw emotion and the transformative nature of her creative journey. He encapsulated everything she had hoped people would see. "This isn't just art, it's a catharsis. You've truly conquered the shadows of self-doubt." His observations were not just validation, they were a testament to her growth, proving that she had not only risen above the mockery she faced from Melissa but had transformed it into a competitive edge that enriched her own artistry. As praises filled the air, Melissa stood beside Susan, nodding in agreement with the critic's insight. There was no envious glint in her eye, only acknowledgement of their respective paths melding together into something beautiful. In that moment of shared triumph, Susan realized that she could indeed carve out her unique identity in a world of collaborations. The evening culminated with Susan receiving an invitation to showcase her work in a prestigious local gallery. Standing under the soft lights, surrounded by the warmth of laughter and recognition, Susan felt a profound sense of achievement. She had not only proven her competence as an artist, but she had also conquered the fear of being overshadowed. She had stepped into her own light. More than the accolades, Susan reveled in the understanding of her journey. She had taken everything: pain, insecurity, echoes of ridicule, and alchemized it into an incredible testament to her resilience. The journey ahead was no longer daunting, it was steeped in possibility. As the evening wound down, she and Melissa shared a knowing laughter that signified a deeper bond forged through overcoming obstacles together. They would continue to collaborate, but now, Susan understood that she could lead their partnership, bringing her authentic voice into the forefront without hesitation. The last echoes of applause began to fade, leaving Susan standing before her canvas, a space filled with stories and profound meaning. She had achieved not merely recognition but established a solid newfound confidence. As she stepped away from the evening filled with warmth and sincerity, a feeling of fulfillment enveloped her. Real triumph was never about merely winning, it was about acknowledging her journey, owning her identity, and respecting her voice in a collaborative realm. With a heart full of courage and a spirit ready to seize new opportunities, Susan embraced the future with an unshakable resolve. And now, if you've witnessed this incredible transformation, you need to subscribe to our channel now and not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to wake the algorithm and spread the word. Comment your reactions and theories about Susan's inspiring journey. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to support incredible stories of overcoming. This is the moment to show you care.